I call a living shipwreck because it has been colonized and does have all those soft corals and hard corals and all this marine species that now call that home in this desert environment, which is really special to talk about. You can't help but try to see the wreck through the marine life can be pretty hard. So that's exciting to see how thriving it is.
Welcome back to another episode of Fascinated by Shipwrecks podcast. I am really super excited today to introduce you to Tane Casserley of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. He's a maritime archaeologist and a historian who's been working with the iconic USS Monitor shipwreck since the early 2000s. So he's got a depth of experience, pardon the pun, on this work. So Tane, if you could just give us a little bit of your background and how you came to working with this shipwreck.
Yeah, well, it's been a long road, but I initially started that I grew up on the island of Maui in Hawaii and went to the University of Hawaii. And while I was there, a gentleman named Dr. Bill Still, who created the East Carolina University Maritime Archaeology program, the program of Maritime Studies, was a very famous Civil War historian and a monitor enthusiast. So when I was in Hawaii taking classes, he was actually my first maritime history teacher. So being out in the Pacific, you don't know a lot about what happened on the East Coast a lot of times, but he really kind of brought those stories to life about the Civil War and Monitor, and it really intrigued me. And from there, I went on to East Carolina University, which has a long history with Monitor. One of the co-finders of the Monitor back in 1973 was Dr. Gordon Watts, who actually co-founded the ECU program, but he was also the state underwater archaeologist for North Carolina. So he was one of my professors there, and he and Bill Still had started that program. So early on, I had that connection. I also was an avid tech diver, doing the deep diving as well. And there was an opportunity in 2000 to volunteer with the Monitor National Marine Sanctuary. And being a grad student, I thought, how could I pass this up? Right. So that introduced me to Dr. John Broadwater, who was part of all these expeditions. And again, another famous Monitor historian and archaeologist. And that really started my road. And I was hired just a few months later as their diving maritime archaeologist. So I've been with the Monitor Sanctuary for nearly 25 years now. And it's been a wonderful experience so far.
That is just amazing. It's sort of interesting that chain of events that led you to being involved. So for those listeners who may not know about the USS Monitor or don't know a lot about it, maybe you could just explain a little bit about why it's so iconic.
The Monitor is really the great-great-grandfather or ancestor to all modern naval ships and gunnery in that respect. Anything with a large gun that pivots, Monitor was the very first one that put that into action. So it was from the U.S. Civil War. It was the first time two iron warships fought at the Battle of Hampton Roads, March 8th and 9th of 1862. Before then, the world's navies were primarily wooden warships. So if you can imagine those, the tall masts, big wooden sides, and to be able to fire from these vessels, you actually had to turn the entire vessel. And they were vulnerable with those wooden hulls. So during the Civil War, they were experimenting with new naval technologies. The South had taken over the Gosport Navy Yard and taken over one of the vessels there, which is the USS Merrimack, and rebuilt it to an iron-sided vessel. So the Monitor was the Union's response to that, but being wholly unique in its design, and this is where this is the iconic look of Monitor, where it was made to be very low-lying, to work into close to shore, to be an impregnable battery with a single rotating gun turret in the center of it, which could turn independently from the ship. So that means the ship and the guns can now turn independently from one another. So the Monitor is a very strange looking vessel. It has two pointy ends, essentially, the bow and the stern, both come to points. It's very flat. It only really had about a foot or so above the waterline, and just that iconic turret right in the center. So they called it a cheese box and a raft. And back in the day, cheese came in these circular boxes. It is a very strange looking vessel, but it's the precursor to all modern naval ships.
Yes, and it wasn't really built for the open ocean, correct?
Correct. The U.S. Navy's Philosophy at the time was to create a blue water Navy, but John Erickson, the Monitor's designer, just basically ramrodded his design through the design process because he saw the construction of the CSS Virginia or that rebuilt USS Merrimack as a larger threat in Hampton Roads. So he built it specifically to operate in those shallow waters in that area. But unfortunately, that shallow water capability also helped with its demise later that year. And then it gets orders to travel south to participate in a blockade duty. So it's heading south under tow by the USS Rhode Island, side paddle wheeler. On December 30th, it starts encountering a very large storm off Cape Hatteras. So it's battling the storm between the all day and the 30th into the 31st, and it's taking on more and more water. Again, this vessel is not made to be in the high seas. That's why it's under tow. We're starting to see cracks now happen in the lower hull. Water is coming in. Water's coming in through the anchor well. It's coming in through the turret. And it gets to the point finally where the pumps are no longer able to keep working because the water coming in dampening the steam pressure. And they have to raise that iconic red signal lantern to indicate that they're abandoning ship. And then started a heroic action by the USS Rhode Island's crew coming across through huge seas to try to save as many men as they could. And they saved nearly the entirety of the crew, except for 16 poor souls that went down with the ship on December 31st of 1862. So we know 16 men did go down with the ship. Several were washed overboard, but several were unaccounted for. So when we worked with the United States Navy divers back in 2002, when we raised the Monitor's iconic turret, as we were excavating on the seafloor, down 240 feet on the seafloor, the U.S. Navy divers started to find human remains inside the turret. So at that point, all operations stop and you focus exclusively on caring for those remains. I was part of that team as well. And we did find 2 individuals inside that turret, which were safely recovered. And now I can say proudly they are interned at Arlington National Cemetery.
Right. Is it like a lifelong process to do the conservation on something like that?
I would definitely call it a generational process. So we really are, generation being 20 plus years, we're at that point now where a lot of these iconic things are starting to be finished. And we got to realize how large these objects are. We've recovered over 200 tons of material from Monitor, almost a quarter of the ship. So the engine room, the drivetrain, the turret, the engine systems. I mean, it's incredible what we achieve with the U.S. Navy. It's all undergoing conservation at the Mariners Museum in the park, but it just takes so long to get those salts out to stabilize these things. But we're getting to that point where it's starting to happen. So we have the gun carriages are starting to finish. The guns themselves will be done very soon. There's 2 gigantic Dahlgren guns. And very shortly, too, the turret could be done as well. So it's really exciting.
That is exciting. So how did the Monitor become the first national marine sanctuary?
Well, that's a great question. So it is a bit of a strange story. The Monitor was founded in 1973 by a joint multi-group expedition that went out of Duke University in Beaufort, North Carolina. They find the Monitor, but it's not what they expected. So again, if you remember me talking about the Monitor, they're expected to see a shipwreck with 2 pointy ends and a circular turret in the center. Well, that is not what they found. What they found was something with 1 pointy end, a strange little protrusion on the side, and a crushed other end. So it took them nearly a year to stare at those fuzzy black and white images to finally put it together and ask the question, what happens if the ship was upside down? And that's when all the pieces started to come together. And I believe that was Dr. Gordon Watts and Dr. John Broadwater who was having a conversation where it all clicked, which is pretty exciting. So we have this iconic shipwreck offshore. The problem is the U.S. Navy had given up title to it back in the 50s. So it was no longer considered a U.S. naval vessel. So it didn't have all those protections to it. So what do you do? How do you protect this thing? So very luckily, in 1972, the National Marine Sanctuaries Act was passed. Now, this was made to protect very special places in the ocean environment, the marine environment, for the natural wonders, the aesthetic beauties, but also for history, archaeology, and technology. So luckily enough, this act had just passed, and then the governor of North Carolina actually petitioned NOAA to make Monitor the first national marine sanctuary to be able to protect it. Because otherwise, it was out in the high seas, and there were no protections. So Monitor is the very first protected cultural resource that was out in the high seas that's considered sort of that blue water space. And it was the model for all the other ones around the world.
And Monitor is down at 230 feet, is it?
Yeah, about 232 feet, 16 and a half miles off Cape Hatteras, North Carolina.
And so now it's become, over time, it's become an artificial reef, but you're still learning about the wreck itself. And so what does that piece of work look like where you're conserving it? You're also monitoring the monitor itself and the sanctuary. It's kind of like a bit of a multi-piece of work, I would assume.
Yeah, well, there's three real pieces to it. So you have the shipwreck, which I call a living shipwreck because it has been colonized and does have all those soft corals and hard corals and all this marine species that now call that home in this desert environment, which is really special to talk about. You know, I mean, you can't help but try to see the wreck through the marine life can be pretty hard. So that's exciting to see how thriving it is. But we also look at what remains down there. And yes, we did bring up the engineering sections, but the human story is still there. Because the Monitor was really broken into two pieces when it was constructed. From amidships at the center of the vessel to the stern was the mechanical spaces, but for that midships area to the bow was where all the men lived. So that's all still there and contained. So we have those people stories that are still within that section. So for me, I find that even more intriguing than the engineering, because that's, you know, who we are. Those are our ancestors. Those are our heroes that are still down there, and their stories are still there too. So it's very special. And the third part is those pieces that we brought up and are undergoing conservation at the Mariners Museum and Park. That's a whole other story, right? How we're kind of telling that story now through different ways. So yeah, it's really compelling though.
Yes, for sure. So what is the sort of the display like when tourists come to see the Monitor? What are they looking at today, and how are you changing how people will interact with the Monitor going forward?
Well, that's a great question. I'll tell you, it's a challenge because how do you share something that I consider is almost unshareable, and that it is so difficult to get to Monitor, even if you have the proper training as a diver. You have the currents, there's counter currents, the treacherous Hatteras weather we've all heard about, right? It's a cape like Cape Horn. It's everything is changing on a dime out there, so it's very, very difficult to work. So my challenge is, and people in our office, is how do you bring that story to you if you can't get to it? So our principal visitor center, again, the Mariners Museum and Park in Newport News, Virginia, has a fantastic exhibit called the USS Monitor Center, which is about 54,000 square feet of Monitor, telling that story of the ironclads, the Battle of Hampton Roads, and all the major artifact recoveries. And it's immersive. So we have full scale recreations where you can walk through part of a wooden warship or see the front part of the CSS Virginia or walk the decks of a full scale replica of the Monitor. You know, you really get that immersive feeling of what it was like. And you can look into the tanks and see the conservation process. So that's been a huge one for us.
The 50th anniversary is coming up of this first Monitor sanctuary. So obviously you're going to have things to celebrate that. Are there ways that you are helping people to virtually and digitally, look at Monitor besides videos and things like that? Are there other ways that you're going to be bringing that to the public?
Well, and I see that as our primary mission right now, bringing that story to the people and do it in ways that put you in it. So one of the ways we've done that is 2022, we went out with a group called the Global Foundation for Ocean Exploration, and they have a technology called telepresence. And it's essentially putting down an ROV or a robot, or a remotely operated vehicle, that goes down to the Monitor and has a tether going to the surface, and it has a live feed. So we broadcasted live as we explored. But as we did that, we also had a 360 camera mounted to it, which is a camera on a little arm that goes out. It has lenses all over it. And we captured that video, and we've later recreated that into a 360 video. So you can look at it. It's all free. You can look at it on your computer screen and use your cursor and move around, look anywhere. Or if you have those sort of virtual reality glasses, You could download it to that, and now we've put you literally into that space with the monitor. So you see the marine life, you see the wreck. So that's one way to do it, which is, I think, one of the most exciting. But also, we want to share the artifacts with people. Most artifacts, when you go to a museum, they have to be behind a glass case, right? They're very fragile. They need their own climate. They need to have a low humidity. I mean, all those very special things, but there's a distance put between you and that history. So we want to try to basically remove that barrier to access, but protect the artifacts. So what we've done is virtually scan using a light scanner some of these artifacts and 3D printed them. And now we could put them in people's hands, and especially the kids, to almost give them that time machine where they could touch that exact replica, touch it, manipulate it, do whatever they want. The real artifact is safe, but now those kids are touching that, and the same wear marks that the monitors sailors put into those tools, they can feel that, and that's pretty exciting. Really excited to be able to do those types of things.
Wow, that's super tangible, right? Oh, that really then connects people with history, with people, with war machines, with the ocean. There's just so much that's involved there. So that's super fascinating. So what have you got planned for the anniversary?
One of the big ones we're going to be doing is we've been working with a virtual reality modeler, and they've created for us a virtual as-built model of the monitor. So we've seen plans and things, the archives, but the thing is, because monitor was a prototype when it was being built, when they constructed it, they had to make alterations. So they're different than the plans, but we know what they are through the conservation process happening as well as on the shipwreck site. So now what we've done with all the archival data and that real archaeological data coming together, we've built the most accurate virtual model ever of monitor. And I'm not just talking just the shell of it. We have every single nut and bolt is there. So that's one of the things we'll be unveiling as well. Again, free to the public to explore, but really focusing in on the crew living spaces, right? What was it like for them on there? But as we do that, we're going to be sharing that and all these other things I've talked about through a series of events in 2025. And the first one kicks off on March 8th at the Mariners Museum Park, again, Newport News, Virginia. We're having the anniversary of the Battle of Hampton Roads. And all of these wonderful things, plus those newly completed artifacts, will all be on display for people. We want people to see it. That's the whole reason we do it. And I'll be taking it to other maritime museums and aquariums across North Carolina as well.
Oh, wow. That sounds really exciting. And just, it's interesting to see, like, what would you say, where do you see Monitor in the Sanctuary in the next 5-10 years?
I hope to be getting more into this sort of virtual realm, and the more we can put it out there, and also making those connections with schools where we could talk about the crew and their lives, or we could talk about engineering. But I'm really excited about how we inspire the next generation of marine scientists and archaeologists. Mm-hmm. So if they can look at these things like this 3D prints that most classrooms have now, or building virtual models, or doing things with video to help tell our historical stories. That's what I hope to do. So we get more and more to that. But again, it's inspiring the next generation, so then I can pass that torch to somebody else, just like Dr. Broadwater and Dr. Watts did with me.
Yeah, that's fascinating. A fascinating look inside everything that's going on all around USS Monitor. So is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, there's so much. You just get so excited talking about Monitor. I mean, really, it's really just, we talk about the technologies then and now, but it really gets back to the people. And when I look through what that crew went through during the Battle of Hampton Roads, sort of what that whole experience was, being in that 22-foot turret with cannonballs clanging off it. You can't see anything, smoke's coming out, you're terrified. Then I think a lot of that same crew who are struggling to keep the ship afloat in the end of 1862 when the ship is going down, and just those brothers being together, helping each other. And I just don't want people lose sight that really talking about these heroes that were out there fighting to save the nation, to unify the nation. And it tells just a wonderful story paired with all this wonderful technology sharing. But it really gets back to, it's the people stories that matter.
That is very true. This has been just absolutely great to have you here today, Tani, and I really appreciate your time. This has been another fascinating episode. So with that, I will end for now and wish you the best going forward with Monitor and the anniversary celebrations.
Oh, thank you so much. And please, people stay tuned at monitor.noaa.gov. That's our website, and you'll learn all about it.
In the deep, the answers hide. Echoes of the past call out. Whispers from beneath the waves. What secrets do the shadows keep? Do we dare disturb their sleep? Ooh, what secrets do the shadows keep?